My name is Eleanor Whitfield. I'm 72 years old. And 3 days ago, I sat in my own living room, holding a pen above a document that would have stripped me of everything: my home, my savings, my right to make my own decisions. The man across from me was my son's brother-in-law. The woman beside him was my
The stories
daughter-in-law.
we
My
hold
own
are
son
the
sat next to me,
legacies we
not quite
leave
meeting my
behind.
eyes. They thought I
I'm
was
ready to share
confused.
mine
They
with you.
thought I was
Stories we
fading.
hold
They
are
thought
the
the hardest
legacies
part
we
of their
leave
plan
behind.
was already behind
I'm
them.
ready to share
What they
mine with
didn't
you
know was
now.
that I'd spent 38 years as a psychiatrist, and I had been watching them far longer than they'd been watching me. I didn't sign that document, but what I did instead, that's the part they never saw coming. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled. And please, stay with me until the end. I want to be honest with you from the very beginning. I was not an easy woman to fool. After nearly 4 decades as a psychiatrist at Oregon Health and Science University, I had developed what my colleagues used to call, half jokingly, a tells detector. I could read the micro expressions most never notice. I could hear the pause that came a half second too late after a difficult question. I could sense the difference between a person who was genuinely nervous and a person who was performing nervousness for an audience. So when people ask me how I didn't see it coming sooner, I give them the same answer every time. I did see it. I just didn't want to be the kind of mother who assumed the worst about the woman her son loved. It was March of 2026. I was living alone in the same house I'd shared with my husband, Thomas, for 31 years. A 3-bedroom craftsman on the east side of Portland, close enough to the Willamette River that on quiet mornings, if the wind was right, you could hear the water. Thomas had been a law professor at Reed College. He passed in 2021, pancreatic cancer, 4 months from diagnosis to the end. Brutal and fast, the way that particular disease tends to be. Since then, I had restructured my life carefully. I retired from OHSU in 2019, 2 years before Thomas died. After the funeral, I had nothing but space and grief and long mornings with no appointments to fill them. But I am, by nature, an organized person. I built a new routine: 5-kilometer walks at 6 in the morning, reading until noon, tending the garden in the afternoon, medical journals and documentary films in the evenings. I was not lonely. I was, if I'm being precise about it, deliberately solitary. There is a difference, and it matters. My son Nathan called every Sunday without fail. He was 41 that spring, a software engineer at a logistics company in Portland, a genuinely kind man who had inherited his father's deep need for everyone in the room to feel comfortable. That quality was one of the things I loved most about him. It was also, I had always known quietly, a vulnerability. People who cannot tolerate other people's discomfort are very easy to steer if someone knows what they're doing. I had met Nathan's girlfriend, Vanessa, twice before that March. Once at a restaurant downtown, her suggestion, neutral ground, which I noted, and once briefly at Nathan's apartment on Christmas Eve. She was 36, sharp-featured, polished, worked in public relations. She always knew exactly what to say in any social situation, which told me she was always on some level thinking several moves ahead. I wasn't yet certain whether that was anxiety or strategy. I needed more time. The phone call came on a Wednesday evening in late March. Nathan's voice had that particular pitch of excitement he gets when he's trying to sound calmer than he feels. Mom, I asked Vanessa to marry me. She said yes. I set down my book. Nathan, that's wonderful, honey, and I meant it genuinely. I wanted my son to have a partner, to have the kind of marriage Thomas and I had built over 3 decades. Imperfect, sometimes complicated, built on genuine respect. I was not a possessive mother. I had spent too many years helping patients untangle the damage done by possessive mothers to ever become one myself. I really want you two to get to know each other properly before the wedding, he said. Like, really know each other. Vanessa's excited about it too. Invite her to dinner, I said. At the house. I'll cook. I spent the next 2 days preparing. Not to impress. I've never cooked to impress. I cooked because it was its most form of hospitality I know. Baked salmon with fresh dill, roasted asparagus, a blueberry tart I'd been making since Nathan was 7, his favorites. I wanted the evening to feel like home, because home is the only atmosphere in which people show you who they actually are. Vanessa arrived with Nathan on a Saturday evening in late March. She brought flowers, white peonies, the expensive kind from a proper florist. She complimented the house warmly. She said all the right things in the right order, and I watched her do it the way I had watched hundreds of patients over the years, fluently, with just enough warmth to read as natural. What caught my attention was not what she said, it was where she looked. When I brought them into the living room, Vanessa's eyes moved quickly and systematically around the room, across the bookshelves stacked with 4 decades of psychiatric literature, across the framed certificates on the wall, across the mantelpiece where Thomas's Patek Philippe watch still sat in its original box. It was not the gaze of someone admiring a home. It was the gaze of someone taking stock. I filed it away, said nothing. Dinner was pleasant. Vanessa was engaged and asked intelligent questions about my career. Nathan was relaxed and happy in the specific way of a man who desperately wants 2 important people to like each other. The food was good. The wine was good. Everything was, on the surface, just fine. And then Nathan went to the kitchen to help clear the plates. And Vanessa and I were alone at the table for approximately 4 minutes. "Mrs. Whitfield," she said, leaning forward slightly, dropping her voice to the register people use when they want to create the impression of sharing something private. "Have you ever thought about selling this house? Portland real estate is just incredible right now. You'd be really set up. 4 minutes alone together." That was the question she led with. I poured us both more tea. "I haven't really thought about it," I said pleasantly. "Too many good memories here to think about leaving." She smiled. The smile didn't reach her eyes, as not quite. "Of course. I just think about you being here all by yourself and I don't know, I want to make sure you're taken care of." "That's very kind," I said. Nathan came back. The conversation moved on, but I sat with those 4 minutes for days afterward. A woman I'd met in person only 3 times, engaged to my son, had asked about selling my home before she'd asked a single question about who I was as a person. It could have been thoughtless small talk. It could have been a dozen innocent things. But I had spent 38 years listening to what people say when they think a conversation is low stakes. And something about those 4 minutes made me go very quiet inside. I said nothing to Nathan, not yet. I needed more information before I voted, and I had enough discipline, Lord knows, enough clinical training to wait. The wedding took place in late April 2026 at a vineyard in the Willamette Valley, about an hour outside Portland. It was beautiful in the way that Vanessa seemed to do everything. Tasteful, expensive without being showy, every detail controlled. She had planned it entirely herself. I had not been asked to contribute a single thing, which was framed gently as consideration for me. "Mom, we don't want you stressing out. Just come and enjoy yourself," but which I recognized for what it actually was. I was being positioned as a guest at my own son's wedding rather than as his mother. I chose my dress carefully anyway. A deep plum silk I'd bought 2 years earlier for a colleague's retirement party. My stylist Brenda did my hair the morning of the wedding, and when she finished, she looked at me in the mirror and said, "Ellie, you look like someone who means business." She meant it as a compliment. She had no idea how perfectly she'd read the room. I arrived early because I always arrive early. My seat was in the 5th row. I want you to sit with that for a moment, the 5th row, behind Vanessa's college roommates, behind 2 couples who turned out to be neighbors of the Hargrove family, behind Vanessa's former supervisor from her first PR job, the mother of the groom, the woman who had raised the man standing at that altar for 41 years, was in the 5th row, craning her neck to watch her son walk up the aisle. I kept my face completely still. After 38 years, I had a lot of practice at that. It was during the cocktail hour that I met Derek Hargrove for the first time. He found me. That was the first thing I noted. He sought me out rather than waiting for an introduction, weaving through the crowd with the deliberate casualness of someone who has a destination but doesn't want to look like it. He was 43 that spring. Well-built, well-dressed, charcoal suit, firm handshake, the kind of smile that uses just enough of the right muscles to look genuine. He had done his homework on smiling. "Mrs. Whitfield, what a pleasure. Vanessa has told me so much about you. 38 years at OHU's. That's genuinely something, he said 38 years at OHU. Not Nathan mentioned you were a doctor, or Vanessa said you'd retired. He knew the institution. He knew the number of years. He had researched me specifically before arriving at his sister's wedding, and he wanted me to feel that I had been paid special attention. I know that move. I have watched it work on vulnerable people in clinical settings for decades. You make someone feel seen, truly seen, and from that false sense of intimacy, you begin to probe. It must be fascinating, he continued, accepting champagne from a passing server without breaking eye contact with me, having that kind of insight into people. What makes them tick? What they're really after? You develop a sense for a lot of things, I said, a beat. Then did you ever work with pharmaceutical or biotech companies? I know physicians at your level sometimes had some pretty interesting arrangements with the industry. Not what was your research focus, not what kind of patients did you treat. Straight to the financial relationship between a senior physician and the biotech industry. He was looking for something specific. He just wasn't sure yet whether I had it. Oh, I was just a regular doctor, I said warmly. Saw patients, wrote papers. Nothing very glamorous. He smiled and let it go, and a few minutes later, Nathan pulled him into a group photograph, and I was left alone with my champagne and my observations. I left the reception before 10. The dancing had started, and it was clear Nathan wasn't going to ask me to the floor. He was absorbed in his new family, lit up with happiness, and I was genuinely glad for that happiness, even as I sat at a table near the back and watched it from a distance. Vanessa's friends chatted around me as though I wasn't there. I ate my chicken, which was fine, and I thought about Derek Hargrove, and I drove home through the dark, and I was quiet for a long time. He had researched me. He had gone to that wedding already knowing things about me. The question was, what was he planning to do with what he found? The weeks that followed gave me my answer piece by piece. Nathan went quiet after the honeymoon, which was normal and expected. But Vanessa started calling me, not Nathan. Vanessa. Short, friendly, carefully calibrated calls. How are you? How's the garden? Nathan worries about you. Being in that big house all by yourself. Nathan had not said, in any of our weekly calls, that he was worried about me in my house. I still walked 5 kilometers every morning. I still drove myself everywhere, managed my finances, maintained my garden, cooked from scratch, and read medical journals to keep my mind sharp. If Nathan was suddenly worried about me, that worry had been installed in him recently by someone who knew what they were doing. Someone was building a case, painting a picture of a woman getting older, getting slower, possibly getting confused. A woman who might, with the right combination of concern and gentle pressure, be persuaded to let other people start making decisions for her. I knew exactly what was happening. I just needed to be certain about who was behind it and how far they'd already gotten before I made my move. The car was gray, a late model sedan with Washington state plates parked across from my house. It was there when I came back from my walk on a Tuesday morning in early May, there again on Wednesday, gone Thursday, back Friday, parked a little further down the block, as though whoever was inside thought varying the position would make it less noticeable. Most people wouldn't have clocked it. I clocked it immediately, because I am an observer by 38 years of professional habit, and because I had been half expecting something like this for 3 weeks. I photographed the license plate, clear image timestamp on the file. I went inside and called Patricia Hollis. Pat is 68 years old and lives in Salem, about an hour south of Portland. She spent over 2 decades as a federal judge, and before that 10 years as a prosecutor, and she is one of the sharpest people I have ever been lucky enough to know. We became close 22 years ago, when she came to my office during one of the most difficult periods of her life. She stayed for 18 months of sessions. I never charged her. Some things matter more than billing rates. We have been close friends ever since, and she knows things about me that I have never told another soul. Pat, I said, I need a favor. Someone's been parking outside my house and watching it. I need the plate run, legally. She didn't ask why. She just said, send me the photo. 2 days later, she called back. The vehicle was registered to Sloan Investigative Services in Tacoma, Washington. Principal. Raymond Sloan, licensed private investigator, specialty. And this is the part that made my stomach drop: asset investigation and background research. Someone had hired a PI to assess what I own, and the only person with both the motivation and the preliminary information to do that was Derek Hargrove. I did not call Nathan. I was not ready for that conversation. What I needed first was a lawyer, and I needed one that same week. James Okafor's office was on S.W. Morrison Street in downtown Portland. He was 55, had practiced elder law for nearly 25 years, and came highly recommended by a former OHU colleague who described him as the person you want when someone's coming for what's yours. His office smelled like old books and good coffee. He listened to everything I told him without interrupting once. "What you're describing," he said when I finished, "is a textbook elder financial abuse pattern. Asset investigation first, then a pressure campaign framed as family concern, designed to get voluntary asset transfer before the target understands what's actually happening." "I understand what's happening," I said. He looked at me over his glasses. "Clearly, which is why I'd like to help you do more than just protect yourself. I think we can document what they're doing well enough to hold them accountable." "That's exactly what I had in mind," I said. We spent the next 2 hours building a plan with two components. The first was legal protection, an irrevocable trust, set up immediate my home, my financial accounts, and, critically, my primary hidden asset inside a structure that no one could touch without triggering multiple legal safeguards. Every original document would live at Okafor's office, not in my home where it might be found during a visit. If anyone ever attempted to have me declared legally incapacitated, control of my assets would already be beyond their reach. The second component was performance. Because here is what 38 years of psychiatry teaches you: people who intend to exploit someone always accelerate when they believe the window is closing. If they believed I was getting a little forgetful, just a little, nothing dramatic, they would push harder, move faster, and make mistakes they might otherwise have been careful to avoid. Mistakes leave evidence. Evidence is what I needed, so I began to perform. It was subtle and deliberate and precisely calibrated. In a phone call with Nathan, I mentioned a doctor's appointment on the wrong day and then laughed and corrected myself. "Sorry, honey, I keep getting my Tuesdays and Thursdays mixed up lately. Isn't that silly?" When Vanessa called that week, I mentioned casually that I'd forgotten to pay the electric bill last month and had to call and sort it out, completely fabricated, but the kind of domestic detail that sticks in people's minds. At a dinner with both of them in mid-May, I asked Nathan twice whether his company had moved offices, watching the glance that passed between him and Vanessa each time. "Babe, should we be more worried?" I heard Vanessa say quietly to Nathan in the kitchen while I was, apparently, resting in the living room. "I don't know," Nathan said. "Maybe Derek's right." I sat in my armchair and kept my expression vague and thought, "Good, come a little closer, show me what you've got." Meanwhile, Okafor and I moved fast on the legal side. Within a week, the irrevocable trust was fully executed, notarized, and filed. My home was inside it, my financial accounts were inside it. And the asset that nobody in Derek Hargrove's camp knew existed, the asset that made everything else look modest by comparison, was inside it too, wrapped in protections that would take years of serious legal challenge to even begin to unravel. I went home after the signing, made coffee, sat on the back porch, and looked at the apple tree Thomas had planted the year Nathan was born. Come on then, I thought. I'm ready. It was Pat who found it, about a week after we identified Raymond Sloan. She had done additional digging through her legal network, quietly, carefully, the way a former federal judge knows how to do things. What she uncovered made me set down my coffee cup and sit very still. Sloan had opened a file on me, not on my house, not on my finances in general, but on me personally by name in early April. Not after the wedding. Before it, the wedding was April 26th. The investigation had begun on April 7th. Derek Hargrove had been running a background check on his sister's future mother-in-law for nearly 3 weeks before he walked into that vineyard in his suit, shook my hand, and said 38 years at OHU. How remarkable. He already had a file on me. When he steered our conversation toward biotech industry relationships, he wasn't guessing. He was testing, checking what I might reveal against what he'd already found. His problem was that what Sloan had found was incomplete. My home, yes. My OHCU pension, yes. A couple of straightforward investment accounts, yes. But nothing about my primary asset. Nothing about the patents. Nothing about the royalty arrangement or the equity stake. Because there was nothing to find on any public record. When Thomas and I had structured that arrangement back in 2017, we'd done it through a private holding company on the advice of an accountant who understood that physicians with significant intellectual property benefit enormously from financial privacy. The royalties came through the holding company. The equity was held in the same structure. Without specific knowledge of what you were looking for and the legal authority to compel disclosure, it was completely invisible. Derek had spent weeks investigating me and found a fraction of what I actually had. He was building his entire plan on a foundation of incomplete information. He doesn't know, I said to Pat when she finished walking me through it. He has no idea about the Meridian arrangement. Not a trace of it in the Sloan file, she confirmed. He thinks he's hunting a rabbit, I said. He has no idea what he's actually up against. Ellie. Pat's voice shifted to the tone she reserves for things she needs me to hear clearly. Be careful. This man is practiced at what he does. Don't underestimate him just because he's underestimating you. I won't, I said, but I do appreciate the irony. I called Okafor from the car that evening and updated him on everything. We were aligned. The trust paperwork needed to be fully executed within the week before Derek made his next move. 4 days later, it was done. The phone rang at 10:14 on a Tuesday night in mid-May. People do not call at 10:14 p.m. with a prepared script. You call that late when something has been sitting heavy on you all day, and you've finally run out of ways to avoid it. Vanessa's voice when I answered was stripped of its usual finish. The PR polish was completely gone. Mrs. Whitfield, I hope I'm not calling too late. Not at all. Are you all right? A pause. I wanted to apologize about the seating at the wedding. You should have been in the front row. I let other people's opinions get into my head and it wasn't right. I sat up slowly. People running a calculated campaign do not call at 10:14 p. to apologize for seating charts 3 weeks after the fact. This was not strategic. This was a woman with something sitting on her conscience. I kept my voice warm and even and waited. Derek has a lot of ideas, she said after a moment, about how the family should be organized. He says he's just trying to make sure everyone's taken care of. That's his phrase for it, taken care of. What do you think he means by that? I asked carefully, neutrally, the way I'd ask patients questions I already knew the answer to for 38 years. I think Derek sees opportunities, she said slowly. He's always been like that. He figures out how things can be arranged more efficiently. That's how he puts it. Efficient. And Nathan goes along with it? Nathan trusts Derek completely. Money stuff stresses Nathan out, like genuinely stresses him out. So having someone who just handles it is a relief for him. He doesn't ask too many questions. He just wants everybody to be happy. There it was. That was the key to Nathan's involvement, not greed, not malice, but the emotional outsourcing of an anxious man who'd found someone willing to carry the things that scared him. Derek had positioned himself as a solution to Nathan's discomfort. It was a perfect hook. Vanessa, I said carefully, how much do you know about what Derek has planned? Specifically, a longer pause. He said we should help you consolidate your assets, move things into a structure that's easier to manage at your stage of life. He said it would protect you. Did he tell you he'd hired someone to look into my finances? Silence, the kind that tells you everything. He hired a what? She didn't know. She genuinely didn't know about Raymond Sloan. Derek had kept that from his own sister, which told me something important about how he operated. He told each person exactly as much as they needed to know to play their part, and not one word more. Vanessa thought she was participating in a pushy but well-intentioned family intervention. She had no idea there was a PI. She had no idea about the plan to use a compliant physician to have me declared cognitively incapacitated. She was not innocent. She had been a willing participant in pressuring me. But there is a meaningful clinical and moral difference between a willing participant and an architect of a plan. I had built my career on understanding that difference. Vanessa said, I'm not angry with you, but I need you to think carefully about what you actually know about your brother's intentions and what you don't, because there may be parts of this that would concern you very much. What kind of parts? Her voice was very quiet. We'll talk, I said, soon, in person, not on the phone. After I hung up, I lay in the dark for a long time. I hadn't planned to recruit Vanessa, but Vanessa had just, without realizing it, volunteered herself. I called Okafor the next morning. James, I think we may have someone on the inside, but I need to play this very carefully. How carefully? Surgical, I said. Derek flew down from Seattle in early June officially to visit Vanessa and Nathan. He called me that Friday afternoon, smooth as always. Mrs. Whitfield, I hope I'm not imposing. I'd love to take you all to lunch tomorrow. Low key, just a chance to chat. Low key, no documents, no pressure, just a conversation between family. Of course, I said. That sounds lovely. The restaurant was in the Pearl District, one of those farm-to-table places where $40 buys you a plate that looks like modern art and disappears in 4 bites. Derek arrived before me, which told me he wanted to be in position first. He stood to greet me, pulled out my chair, and ordered sparkling water for the table without asking what anyone wanted. 20 minutes in, after the appetizers, he pulled out an iPad. Look, I've put together some thoughts, nothing formal. Just some ideas I want to walk you through. It was, in fact, extremely formal. Clean slides, precise numbers, the kind of presentation a person builds when they want to appear thorough while actually being opaque. The proposal: move my home and liquid assets into a family protection trust, jointly administered by Nathan and Derek, which would, Derek explained with great warmth, mean I'd never have to worry about any of the complicated stuff ever again. Here's the thing, Mrs. Whitfield, he said, leaning forward with his elbows on the table. At the end of the day, this is just about making your life simpler. You've worked hard your whole life. You deserve to just breathe, you know? Let us handle the heavy lifting. Let Derek. That sounds like a lot to keep track of, I said, letting my voice go slightly vague. You mentioned a trust? I'm not sure I quite followed that part. Derek smiled the patient smile of a man who believes he is dealing with someone he can afford to be patient with. Totally understandable. That's the whole point. You don't have to follow it. That's what we're here for. So kind, I said. We can set up another meeting, go through everything more slowly, he said. No rush at all. There was rush. I could feel it underneath the practiced calm. He wanted this done. 3 days later, Nathan came to see me alone, the first time since the wedding. He sat at my kitchen table and turned his car keys over and over in his hands without meeting my eyes, and said the things that Derek had clearly given him to say. The house was too much for one person. There were wonderful places in Lake Oswego. Wouldn't I feel safer somewhere with people around? Didn't I want to stop worrying about all of this? Nathan, I said quietly, who told you I was worried? He didn't answer. Was it Derek? His silence was the answer. I love you, I said, and I know you believe you're doing the right thing. But I need you to hear me clearly. I am fine. I am healthy. I am sharp, and I am not going anywhere. He nodded. But he had the look of a man who had already decided to believe something different and was choosing that belief over what was sitting right in front of him. After he left, I sent 2 text messages. One to Okafor, they're accelerating, I think we're close. One to Pat, time to talk about the final steps. They came on June 7th, a Sunday afternoon, presented as a casual visit. Derek, Nathan, Vanessa, and a man I hadn't met before, Gregory Atwell. He was introduced simply as someone who helps families with paperwork. He had a leather briefcase, a notary seal kit, and the air of a man who performs a service and does not ask questions about context. I had been expecting them. My voice recorder was running in my apron pocket. My phone propped against a book on the 3rd shelf of the built-in bookcase, with a clear sightline to the seating area, was recording video. I had practiced the angle the day before. Gregory sat up at the dining table without being invited. He laid out his materials with the comfortable efficiency of someone who has done this many times in many living rooms. Derek placed the documents on the coffee table, organized, tabbed, with small arrow stickers marking exactly where my signature was needed. Mrs. Whitfield, we're so grateful you're open to talking this through, he began. We've made everything as simple as possible. You just need to sign in 3 places, and we'll handle absolutely everything from here. I picked up the document. I read slowly, pausing at certain words longer than necessary, performing the gentle confusion of a woman who is trying her best to keep up. Then I reached Clause 4, authorization for full financial decision-making transfers to designated representatives, Nathan Whitfield and Derek Hargrove, upon confirmation of cognitive impairment by a physician designated by the trust administrators. A physician designated by the trust administrators. Not by me, not by my own doctor, by Derek. I understood the mechanism perfectly. Once I signed, they would arrange for a compliant physician, their physician, to document cognitive decline, and control of everything I owned would transfer to Derek and Nathan immediately and irrevocably. It was elegant in the way that truly cynical plans sometimes are. I set the document down, looked up. Could I have a glass of water? I'm so sorry, my throat is just a little. Of course, Vanessa said immediately, standing up. And then, as she moved toward the kitchen, I let myself go. Not a fall, not a seizure, nothing dramatic, just a slow, deliberate softening. The kind I had watched happen in my office dozens of times over the years when patients fainted from anxiety or low blood pressure. A gradual release of muscle tension, a slide sideways in the chair, a complete and utterly convincing stillness. After 38 years of observing the human body under stress, I knew exactly what I was doing. Nathan made a sound I had not heard from him since he was a child. Vanessa dropped something in the kitchen and came running. Derek stood up fast, knocking his knee on the coffee table, and I registered the specific quality of his alarm, not the alarm of a man frightened for someone's safety, but the alarm of a man watching his plan fall apart. I stayed still for 4 minutes. I had timed it in my head beforehand. 4 minutes was enough. Enough for Gregory to quietly begin bringing his documents back into the briefcase. Enough for Nathan to call my doctor's emergency line in a panic. Enough for the entire atmosphere of the room to collapse from controlled pressure into genuine chaos. When I opened my eyes, Nathan was kneeling on the floor beside my chair, holding my hand in both of his. Mom, can you hear me? Are you okay? I looked at him with the soft, slightly disoriented expression of someone coming back from somewhere far away. Nathan, what happened, honey? You kind of passed out for a minute. Just rest. Don't move. I turned my head slowly and looked around the room. Gregory's briefcase was closed. The documents were gone from the coffee table. Derek was standing near the window, on his phone, his back to the room. I think, I said faintly, I'd like to lie down for a bit. I'm so sorry, everyone. I don't know what came over me. They left within the hour. No signatures had been collected. No notary seal had touched a single page. After the door closed, I lay on my bed and listened to my own heartbeat settle, and I thought, round 1. Pat called 5 days later. Her voice had the quality it gets when she's about to tell me something she wished she hadn't found. Ellie, I need you to hear this carefully. Go ahead. Derek Hargrove's mother. Gloria Hargrove. She died in March of 2020 at the age of 78. 7 months before she died, in August of 2019, she signed over the majority of her financial assets to Derek through a family trust arrangement. I closed my eyes. The documents were notarized by a Gregory Atwell licensed in Washington state. The same notary, the same structure, a different old woman who hadn't seen it coming in time. Gloria's younger sister, a woman named Helen, lives outside Minneapolis, filed a civil complaint in 2020. She alleged undue influence, claimed Gloria had been pressured. The case was dismissed for insufficient evidence. Because she didn't have documentation, I said. Right. But the complaint is on the public record, Ellie. And there's one more detail. A pause. Helen wrote in her complaint that in the months before the signing, Gloria had told her she was feeling confused, forgetful, that Derek had arranged for her to see a doctor he'd chosen, and that doctor had told her she was experiencing early cognitive changes that made it important to plan ahead immediately. A Dr. Derek had chosen, who had conveniently documented cognitive decline that justified a family-managed trust. He had used the same physician gambit on his own mother. He had refined this method on his own mother and walked away without consequence, and now he was here in Portland, running it again. Pat, I said, when I could speak evenly, I need you to reach out to the Oregon DOJ Elder Financial Abuse Unit. Already on my list, she said. I put down the phone and sat in my kitchen for a long time. Outside, through the window, the apple tree was in full June bloom. Thomas had planted it the year Nathan was born. No one was taking my home. No one was locking me away somewhere convenient. And whatever had happened to Gloria Hargrove was not going to happen to me. I made sure of that. I invited Vanessa for coffee on a Tuesday morning in mid-June. A small place near my house called Trailhead, where the staff has known me for years and where I have sat at the same corner table on and off for almost a decade. Comfortable ground. Mine. She arrived in workout clothes, which told me she'd come straight from a gym class. She hadn't bothered to change, which told me she was either running on a tight schedule or she'd been nervous enough that it slipped her mind. I suspected the latter. I let her talk for a few minutes about nothing important. The apartment, a work project, the strange Portland weather in June. I let her settle. And then I put down my coffee cup and looked at her with the eyes I had used in 38 years of sitting across from people who needed to hear something true. Vanessa, I wasn't actually confused during that lunch with Derek, and I didn't actually faint at the house last Sunday. She went completely still. I know your brother hired a private investigator to assess my assets before the wedding. I know that Gregory Atwell has worked with Derek before, specifically in 2019, when your mother signed over her assets to Derek 7 months before she died. I watched it move across her face, the composed surface first, then the layer of practiced neutrality underneath it, and then finally, the raw, unguarded expression of a person whose understanding of their own history has just been rearranged. My mother, she said, very flat. Derek told you it was her choice, I said, not a question. She didn't answer for a long moment. He said she was worried about taxes, that she'd asked him to manage everything, that it was a relief for her. Did you ever ask her yourself? A long silence. She was gone pretty fast after that. We didn't really get the chance to. She stopped. Her jaw tightened. Oh, God. I reached into my bag and placed a single sheet of paper on the table between us, the first page of Helen Hargrove's civil complaint. Just the summary. Enough to see the shape of things. She read it twice. He did the same thing, she said, barely audible. That's what the record suggests. Helen couldn't prove it. She didn't have enough. But you, Vanessa, you have been in rooms I haven't. You have heard conversations I haven't. And I think you may have recorded one recently that tells a very clear story about what Derek actually intends. She looked up sharply. How did you know about that? I didn't, I said. I'm asking you now. She was quiet for a long moment, turning her coffee cup in her hands. He called me to walk through the plan, the full plan. I recorded it because I don't know exactly why. Something felt off and I needed some kind of record. I wasn't even sure at the time what I thought I'd do with it. What does he say on it? He talks about moving your assets, about getting a doctor to document your decline, about the place in Lake Oswego. He calls it the plan, not an option. And he says, she closed her eyes briefly. He says, once everything's in the trust, we won't have to worry about you inserting yourself into family decisions anymore. I kept my face still. It took real effort. Vanessa, I said after a moment, I'm not asking you to betray your brother for my sake. I'm asking you to decide whether what he's doing is something you can live with knowing about. And I'm telling you, if you give that recording to my attorney, along with of what you've witnessed, it will matter, not just for me, for what happened to your mother. She looked at the table for a long time. What do I tell Nathan? She asked. The truth, I said. I know that sounds simple, but it's the only place you can actually start from. On June 12, 2026, I sat across from James Okafor in his Portland office and laid out my full financial picture for the first time in a formal legal context. I walked him through the Meridian Therapeutics arrangement completely. 4 co-authored patents developed during my years at OHU, covering therapeutic protocols for PTSD and chronic anxiety disorders. A licensing agreement signed in 2017 when Meridian, a San Francisco biotech, acquired the commercial rights, annual royalty payments flowing through my private holding company ever since. An equity stake that had grown steadily as Meridian's treatments moved through trials and into approved clinical use. Current combined value as of June 2026, just over $8 million. Held in a private structure, visible on no public record, untraceable by a PI running standard asset searches. Okafor studied the documents for a while without speaking. He is not a man who surprises easily, but he studied these documents for a while. Eleanor, he finally said, Derek Hargrove has spent 2 months building a plan to take your assets. And the asset that makes this worth the risk, the thing that changes the entire scale of what he's after, he doesn't know exists. Correct. And everything he does know about is now inside a trust he cannot touch. Correct. So when the truth comes out, when it comes out, I said, in front of witnesses and investigators, with everything documented and recorded, he will have committed serious legal exposure in pursuit of a target he catastrophically underestimated. And he'll discover in that same moment that the real target was 8 times larger than he imagined and completely beyond his reach. Okafor was quiet for a moment. Then, in 25 years of doing this work, Eleanor, I have genuinely never had a client run a play like this. I had 38 years of practice, I said, understanding how people behave when they think they've won. We spent the rest of the meeting coordinating with the Oregon DOJ. Pat had already made the initial contact. The investigators had reviewed Derek's history, the Sloan contract, the pattern connecting Gregory Atwell to the 2019 Gloria Hargrove case. They were ready to be present at the final meeting, not to make arrests, not yet, but to observe, document, and preserve everything for what came next. That evening, I called Vanessa. Are you ready? I asked. Yeah, she said. Her voice had steadied considerably since our coffee. Yeah, I'm ready. Whatever happens in that room, I said, I want you to know that what you're doing takes real courage. Not for me, for yourself, and for your mother. She was quiet for a moment. I keep thinking about whether she was scared when she signed those papers. I know, I said gently. I can't know that and do nothing. Then don't, I said, and you won't have to. June 14th, 2026. 2:00 in the afternoon. I had texted Derek 2 days earlier, keeping my message carefully vague and slightly effortful sounding, the prose of a woman who is managing. Derek, I've been thinking over what you all presented. I think I'd like to go ahead. Could you come by Sunday with the paperwork? I'd feel better signing with everyone there. He responded within 4 minutes. Absolutely, Mrs. Whitfield will be there at 2. So glad you're feeling better. I had been recording since 1:30. My phone was positioned on the bookshelf by 1:45. At 1:55, I sent Okafor a single word, ready. Derek arrived first at 1:58 in a charcoal suit and a white shirt with no tie, the look of a man who wants to appear approachable today rather than corporate. He shook my hand with both of his. Mrs. Whitfield, thank you so much for having us. I know this is a big step. It is, I agreed. But I've been doing a lot of thinking. Gregory Atwell arrived 2 minutes behind him with his leather briefcase and his seal kit and set up at the dining table with the comfortable efficiency of a man who has done this in many living rooms in many cities. Nathan and Vanessa came together. Nathan's face had a tight, determined quality, the face of a man who has decided something is right and is pushing through his own doubt. Vanessa's face was carefully blank in a way I recognized as effort. I brought out coffee, set it on the table, sat in my armchair, the chair by the window, where I have read every book I have read in this house for 30 years. Derek placed the documents on the coffee table. Same tabs, same arrow stickers, 3 signature lines waiting. Before we get started, I said pleasantly, I want to let everyone know I've been recording this conversation. Oregon is a one-party consent state, so that's perfectly legal. I just want to be transparent. One blink from Derek. Controlled immediately. Of course, we have nothing to hide. Wonderful, I said. He walked me through the documents. I listened with the expression I had been practicing for weeks. Attentive but slightly effortful, the face of a woman doing her best to keep up. I asked 2 slow, slightly tangled questions. Derek answered both with patient thoroughness, the thoroughness of a man who believes the finish line is visible. He set the pen in front of me. Gold-tipped, expensive, the kind of pen you bring to a closing. I reached for it, let my hand move toward the first signature line. 3 firm knocks at the front door. "Expecting anyone?" Derek asked. His voice stayed even, but I heard the edge underneath it. "I don't think so," I said, standing slowly. "Let me just see who it is." I walked to the front door and opened it. James Okafor stood on my porch in his good gray suit. Behind him stood 2 investigators from the Oregon DOJ Elder Financial Abuse Unit, dressed plainly, credentials visible at their belts. One of them carried a camera bag. "Eleanor," Okafor said warmly. "Sorry, we're just a touch late." "Right on time," I said. "Please come in." The sound Derek made was very small. A slight intake of breath, caught and controlled in under a second. But I heard it. After 38 years, I hear everything. Okafor introduced himself and the investigators with the calm authority of a man who has nothing to prove. "I represent Mrs. Whitfield in all legal and financial matters. These investigators are with the Oregon DOJ Elder Financial Abuse Unit and are here at her request, given certain documented patterns of behavior we've been tracking over the past several weeks. I trust the documents you've brought are in proper legal order." Gregory Atwell had gone completely still beside the dining table, his seals kit open and his hands not moving, like a man hoping that stillness will make him invisible. Derek said, with impressive composure, "There must be some kind of misunderstanding. We're just here to help Eleanor with some family planning." "Great," Okafor said, pleasantly. "Then this should be very straightforward." And then Vanessa stood up. She had been sitting in the chair nearest the window, and I had watched her from the edge of my vision, from the moment the investigators walked in. I had watched her make her decision. I could see the moment it settled, a quiet squaring of the shoulders, a single slow breath. She reached into her bag. She placed her phone on the coffee table. She looked at the investigators. "I have a recording," she said. Her voice was steady. "Of a phone call between me and my brother from 3 weeks ago. He explains the plan in detail." Derek turned to look at his sister. Something moved across his face that I had not seen there before. Genuine surprise. He had not accounted for Vanessa. He had told her enough to make her useful, and not enough to make her dangerous, and he had fatally miscalculated the distance between those two things. "Vanessa," he started. "You told me Mom asked you to manage her money," Vanessa said, not loudly, just steadily, one word at a time. "You told me it was her decision, that she wanted it." "She did she, Derek, or did you take it?" The room went silent in a way that rooms rarely do outside of courtrooms and operating theaters. I stood. I went to my bedroom in my house where I have slept for 31 years, and I came back carrying a folder. I set it on the coffee table. "James," I said, "would you read the estimated current value on page 2? Okafor picked up the folder, put on his glasses, and read, "According to the most recent independent valuation, the equity position and accumulated royalty rights held by Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield through her private holding company carry a combined estimated market value of $8.3 million, all of which, as of May 15th of this year, is held within an irrevocable trust administered by independent counsel." Absolute silence. Derek stared at the page, then at me. I watched him understand, in real time, standing in my living room, that it was over, every piece of it. The plan, the leverage, the months of careful setup. All of it built on an incomplete picture of a woman he had dangerously underestimated. 8.3 million, I said, sitting back down in my armchair, and not 1 cent of it within your reach. But thank you, truly, for your concern about my welfare. Gregory snapped his briefcase shut and moved toward the door. "Mr. Atwell," one of the investigators said quietly, "we'd like to speak with you about the notarizations you performed in connection with the Gloria Hargrove estate in 2019. You're not required to speak with us today, but we will be in contact." Gregory stopped. He didn't turn around. Nathan had not moved from his chair. He was staring at me with an expression I had not seen on his face in a very long time. The expression of a man who is actually, genuinely seeing his mother. Not the worried, fading woman Derek had described to him. Me, Eleanor, sitting in my own chair in my own house, 3 steps ahead of everyone in the room. What happened on the porch while the three of us remained inside? Okafor told me afterward, and the investigators' documentation confirmed it. Derek, faced with two DOJ investigators and his own exposure, made the move I had fully expected him to make. He pivoted. Quickly, smoothly, with the fluency of a man who has been caught before and knows how to reframe. He told the investigators that the entire arrangement had been Vanessa's idea, that she had come to him months ago, worried about her aging mother-in-law, and asked for his professional guidance in setting up a protective structure, that he had simply assisted his sister out of family loyalty, that any aggressive elements of the plan had originated with Vanessa's concern, not his. It was a convincing story, built in seconds. The story of a man who practices. Okafor let him finish. Then he placed two documents on the patio table. The first was a copy of the contract between Derek Hargrove and Raymond Sloan Investigative Services, signed April 7th, 19 days before the wedding. Vanessa's name appeared nowhere on it. Derek's signature was at the bottom. His Seattle business address, his own credit card on file for the retainer payment. The second was a printout of a text message thread between Derek and Gregory Atwell, obtained during the DOJ's preliminary investigation, which referenced the Hargrove family trust arrangement from 2019 in language that made clear it was not their first collaboration of this kind. Derek looked at both documents. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, "I'd like to call my attorney." "Absolutely," Okafor said. "You should do that right away." Gregory Atwell said almost nothing from the moment the investigators introduced themselves, which was, Okafor told me later, probably the single smartest decision he made all afternoon, and also the decision of a man who knew precisely how much legal exposure he was carrying. The investigators did not make arrests that day. What they did was gather, photograph, and formally document the documents Derek had brought, the Sloan contract, the Atwell text thread, Vanessa's phone recording. They informed Derek formally that he was the subject of an active investigation under Oregon's elder financial abuse statutes, and that he should make himself available for follow-up. Derek left my property that afternoon in his rental car, alone, without his sister and without his plan. His hands, when he signed the acknowledgement form confirming he'd been informed of the investigation, were not entirely steady. I won't pretend that detail didn't give me some satisfaction. I'm human, I'll admit it freely. When the door closed behind the investigators, when Okafor stepped quietly out to the back porch to give us space, three people remained in my living room. Nathan, Vanessa, me. Vanessa spoke first, and she spoke directly to Nathan, and she told him everything from the beginning. What she'd known, what she hadn't known, what she'd told herself to avoid knowing. She didn't make herself the innocent party. She didn't minimize her own participation. She just laid it out plainly, one thing after another, and I respected that more than I could easily say. Nathan listened. He has always been a good listener that came from his father. He listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, and then he turned to look at me. "How long did you know?" he asked. "I suspected something from the first dinner I hosted for you both in March. I knew for certain something was wrong when I identified the investigator watching my house in early May." He was quiet again, "And you didn't tell me. I didn't have evidence yet, and I needed to understand how much you were involved before I knew what conversation to have with you." He winced. The implication of that I'd had to wonder about his involvement at all, landed the way I'd known it would. "Mom, I swear to you I didn't know about the investigator. I didn't know what the documents actually said. I thought it was just Derek kept saying it was about protecting you, simplifying things. And I wanted to believe that. I know you did. And the forgetting things, the appointments, performed," I said, "deliberately, to accelerate their timeline and make their intentions visible enough to document." He stared at me. Something moved across his face, disbelief, and underneath it, something almost like a reluctant laugh that never quite made it out. "You were playing them the whole time." "I was protecting myself," I said, "which I should not have had to do alone." That landed too. He put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands and stayed like that for a moment. When he looked up, his eyes were red. "I chose to listen to the wrong person." he said, when the person I should have been listening to was right here. You've always found it easier to let other people carry the hard things, Nathan. Your father was the same way. It's not a character flaw, it's a habit. And habits can be changed if a person decides to change them. I want to, he said, quiet and direct and unmistakably his own words rather than anyone else's. Change it, starting now. Vanessa was sitting very still in her corner of the room, not inserting herself, giving us what we needed. I looked at her. What you did today, I said, took more courage than you probably feel right now. I want you to know that. She shook her head slightly. I should have seen it sooner. We see things when we're ready to see them, I said. That's true for all of us. Nathan reached across the space between us and took my hand. Not the careful grip of a son managing a fragile mother. The grip of a child who trusts the person holding them, tight, certain. Can we start over? He asked. From right here, from what's actually true. Starting from what's actually true, I said, is the only kind of start that means anything. Outside through the window, the apple tree in the back garden was doing what it always does in June in Oregon, holding still and growing, the way living things do when nobody's watching. Come for dinner on Wednesday, I said, both of you. I'll cook. It is 3 days since all of that happened, and I am sitting on my back porch with my morning coffee, watching the light move through the garden. Let me tell you where things stand, because I think it matters to say clearly, nothing is neatly resolved. Life, in my experience, does not offer neat resolutions. It offers directions. Derek Hargrove is currently the subject of an active investigation by the Oregon DOJ Elder Financial Abuse Unit. Based on what Pat and Okafor have told me, the connection to Gregory Atwell and the 2019 Gloria Hargrove arrangement has been referred to authorities in Washington state as well. Helen Hargrove, Gloria's sister, the woman who filed the civil complaint that went nowhere in 2020, has been contacted. She is 74 years old and lives in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. And when Pat reached her, Pat told me she cried for several minutes and then said, I knew it. I knew it, and I couldn't prove it. Maybe now she can. Gregory Atwell has retained counsel and is under review by the Washington State Notary Licensing Authority. He has not commented publicly, and I don't expect he will. Vanessa is working with a therapist, someone I recommended, a former colleague I trust completely. What she is processing is not simple. The possibility that her brother exploited their dying mother, her own participation in a plan she didn't fully examine, the question of who she wants to be on the other side of all of this. That is real and difficult work, and I have respect for people who choose to do it rather than look away. Nathan came by yesterday and the day before. We sat at the kitchen table and drank coffee and talked the way we hadn't talked in, I realized, sitting across from him longer than just this year, longer than since the wedding. The distance had been building quietly for years, and neither of us had named it. We are naming it now. It is not easy. It is very good. Pat Hollis is driving up from Salem this weekend. We have a bottle of Willamette Valley Pinot that has been waiting for the right occasion, and I think this qualifies. James Okafor called this morning to update me on the investigation. He ended the call by saying, You know, Eleanor, in 25 years of elder law, you are genuinely the most unusual client I've ever had. I took that as the compliment I'm fairly certain he meant it as. And the house? Still here, still mine. The apple tree is in full June bloom. Thomas planted it the year Nathan was born, 41 years ago this coming August. I can see it from where I'm sitting right now. Here is what I want to leave you with, if you'll let me. I spent 38 years helping people find their voices, helping them recognize when they were being diminished, when someone was systematically constructing a smaller version of them, a version that was easier to manage, easier to dismiss, easier to move out of the way. What I know now at 72, that I perhaps understood only in theory before, that work is not something you do only for other people. Sometimes the person in the room who most needs to be told that she is not confused, not fading, not a burden to be sorted, is you. Age is not a countdown. It is an accumulation. And I have never in my life felt more clearly like myself than I do sitting here on this Tuesday morning in June in the house that is mine, drinking coffee I made myself, watching my garden grow. My name is Eleanor Whitfield. I am 72 years old, and I am not done yet, not even close.
When I first came across Eleanor's story, and the moment that stayed with me wasn't the legal victory, Kungen, as satisfying as that was. It was the image of a woman sitting alone in her car after the investigators left, thinking not I won, but how many people before me didn't. We talk a lot as a society about protecting older people, but Eleanor's story is a quiet reminder that the people they've just been surrounded by voices telling them otherwise. The question I keep coming back to is this: who in your life might be listening to the wrong voices right now? And are you one of the right ones? If this story meant something to you, share it. Not for the numbers, Tang, for the person who needs to hear it today.
See you in the next one.